It will now take a few days to review all the components. Clearly there's going to be overloads through suspension components and gearboxes, and we need to make sure we understand the full extent of what's required before Zandvoort. What did the upgrade package consist of? Spa is, relative to the races prior to it, fairly unique in terms of downforce and drag requirements. We had a new set of rear wings. We tried a few of those on Friday and on Saturday, and a front wing as well, which was both for performance but also to balance the rear wing selections that we had. We also had small details around the floor, and both cars used that across the weekend. Why was our race pace similar to Ferrari when it was 1 second down in qualifying? This pattern hasn't been just in Spa, it's actually been there most of the season. In Budapest, we made some steps, we managed to move forwards and we were able to qualify on pole, capitalizing on that performance. But that was also a little bit of an outlier in itself. Normally prior to that, Ferrari could be up to 6/10 fastest in qualifying, and yet we're able to close in on them on the race. And Spa was no different to that. The approach and philosophy on what you're doing in terms of prioritizing race pace or qualifying pace, I think might be different between the two teams. Obviously the numbers are large. They're far more vast than we'd normally see. You'd normally expect a 10th or 2 swing, not a second. What I can say is that we are gaining to them on degradation in the race. So part of it might be just how the tires are being used in car performance. Part of it is degradation. And the bias we've got is the one that is scoring points race on race. Clearly, though, we have to improve our qualifying position because it's not just relative to Ferrari. We are also racing in a qualifying condition, McLaren and Alpine as well. In order to be racing at the front, in order to get our first win this season, we have to make sure that the qualifying improves from where it is. And that's the focus that hasn't just been this race, we've been looking at it, but across the season, and we'll continue to do so. Was the lack of speed due to the rear wing? It looked more curved than other cars. So a lot of your straight line speed, a lot of your drag, yes, is a function of the rear wing. There's other aspects as well of car setup, but primarily it's down to what rear wing choice you have. Spa is one of those circuits that there is a fine balance between Sector 1 and Sector 3, where straight line really is rewarded, compared to Sector 2, where you can just maximize your cornering speeds. For us, the rear wing choice that we had a few different selections and we tried a few of them across the weekend, but opted for the one that we thought would preserve the tyres for the race, and that ended up being the one that was slower in a straight line. But as you could see, for example, on the final stint of the race relative to Sainz when we were closing him down, we were nearly a second a lap at times faster through Sector 2, just using those tyres far better as a result of it. The weakness, however, was it's very, very slow in a straight line comparatively, and difficult to defend, and difficult therefore also to attack unless their tyres have gone off. How is Lewis feeling? It was a large impact. It was measured at 45 G on the SDR recorder in the car, which is very big on a vertical load. He'll be okay. He'll be back in Zandvoort fighting. I think primarily for him, he's frustrated that he had a very fast race car and a podium was possible. But he, like all of us, are here to fight and continue moving forward. What was the extent of the damage to Lewis's car? There's enough photos floating around the internet to show just how high the car was and how it landed, and the impact was large. What we noticed almost immediately after the impact on the ground was a loss of coolant. You can actually see on the onboard of Alonso that coolant really just flying out towards him, and then you started to see temperatures rise fairly quickly, and that was the primary reason for stopping him on track. It will now take a few days to review all the components. Clearly there's going to be overloads through suspension components and gearboxes, and we need to make sure we understand the full extent of what's required before Zandvoort. Why did we not extend the second stint with George and then put him on soft tyres? The key to that stint is really having the performance right at the end to be able to overtake Sainz. So it's not about the early phase where you're closing in, it's really about the performance differential right towards the end. The soft tyre would have been very, very quick for the first 3 or 4 laps, but it degraded at something nearly close to 4/10 a lap. That means that after just 4 laps, you've lost nearly 1.6 seconds of degradation, and it only gets worse from there. The hard, however, is a lot more robust. It's slower initially, but it gives you a better stint length, and especially towards the end of the stint when you catch the car. So that was the reason behind it. In terms of not extending the stint, every lap we were staying out, because of this large degradation existed on all compounds, science was actually gaining race time relative to us. So therefore, as a result of that, every lap that we waited, that gap was just growing. So there's a fine balance between catching, having enough tyres to overtake, and not letting that gap grow too big. Was George out of tyre life at the end of the race, or was it something else that meant he wasn't really able to attack Sainz into a race? That stint was a large amount of time he had to catch up. Before those stops, Sainz was already 4 seconds ahead, and we had to make that up, plus the small deficit we allowed by staying out longer. George did a really good job on that stint, really maximising it. But as we got within around 2 seconds of Sainz, the area where your car starts to lose downforce, that's when you become a lot more sensitive to tyres that are degraded and hurt, especially on the front axle. And that's where we were. It wasn't that there was a car problem. It wasn't that George didn't do everything he could. It's simply that for the stint that we did, for the amount we pushed, and for the car performance difference that we had to Ferrari, we ran out of tyres. Thank you for all of your questions, and we'll be back in a week's time after the Dutch Grand Prix to answer some more.